The condition of the world today is a result of global consciousness. Where we hold our consciousness, how we expand our consciousness, plays a role in the world around us, and globally as well. Often we don't think that we contribute much to the world, or that we may have nothing to offer the world's problems. However, I'd beg to differ. Every time we heal, grow, or contribute a loving gesture, we expand our consciousness and we add to the collective consciousness of the world. Together, we make a difference in a better world for tomorrow.
So Al, what do you think are the key topics we need to address to help raise consciousness in the world today?
That's a really tough question in terms of what we need to do. I think there's a general healing that needs to take place both at individual and collective levels. I think we need to find our way back home because we've lost our way. I think, the last 200 or 300 years we've repressed what I would consider our full consciousness and been focused extremely on sort of the rational mind. We've shut off the heart, we've shut off the body as modes of knowing and knowing beyond the material world. And so part of that's also connected to the larger environment and some of the environmental challenges that we face. I mean, we face a number of challenges. We face global climate change, increasing inequities, declining biodiversity. And those are all a function of the state of consciousness of sort of, quote, modern people.
Okay.
And so how do we begin to move beyond that? And I think we are starting to move beyond that. I think there's a gathering momentum of people who are interested in looking at the world differently.
We not only look at the world differently, but we must look at ourselves in a different way as well.
You said something I found really interesting. We need to heal and the world needs to heal.
Yeah.
So on an individual basis, I have my ideas of how that would look.
Yeah.
But on a global basis, what do you think the world needs to heal?
I think what happens needs to happen on a global basis, and part of my, quote, academic work has been looking at how consciousness evolves over the course of the human journey. And so what we're really looking at, I was always drawn to the work of Ken Wilber, and I don't know if you know Wilber's work.
I'm familiar with his work.
And, because he talks about the evolution of consciousness, and there's, Gene Gebser and Dwayne Elgin also, there's a number of people that talk about it. And we're on this threshold of having to have our consciousness flip. A different way of knowing and a different way of being in the world. I call it, and other people call it, vision logic rather than sort of rational logic. And it's really, how do we negotiate our way through a world characterized by diversity, diversity of cultures, diversity of people, diversity of species. I think our consciousness needs to awaken in such a way that we're responsive to all the living creatures of the world. So I'm very concerned about sort of the environmental impact that we've had. That's a function of a dysfunctional consciousness. Consciousness, as it evolves collectively, reaches its limits, and then it starts to turn dysfunctional. So we did need to go through this period. But
let me back you up there. So consciousness reaches a limit and then it becomes dysfunctional.
a state of consciousness. So there's different states of consciousness that we move through. So we have sort of two sides, at least from my perspective. We have our everyday consciousness, and that's what I'm talking about there.
Okay, yeah.
And then we have our those opportunities that we have that I would describe as transpersonal or transcendental, where we experience the world in its fullness and that. I've always said those are places that we visit and learn from, but they're not places we live in.
That's right.
We bring back what we learn from those spaces and then try to integrate it into the world in whatever ways that we can.
And I think that's been part of my journey, is visiting that, spirit world, or I refer to it as the silence within.
Yeah.
So when as an artist, I've been exploring, this inner realm of silence in me, and I spent 8 years with the Ashai monks, just turning inward to this world, this inner world, and trying to find that balance between the inner and the outer was sort of what I struggled with for a lot of years.
Yeah, I'm similar, so I've maintained a meditation practice since 1991. That's absolutely instrumental, not just to my well-being, but also to my spiritual life. And so those moments of quiet, my advisor when I did my doctorate, she used to have a phrase that was interesting. It was about learning, but she said, we need a being with and a being alone to learn best. And I think there's I think that fits into this, that we live in a rhythm. We need to live in a rhythm, but we also live in a culture that doesn't value that inner life, that introspection, that introvert. So for me, if you think in terms of Jungian typology, I'm extremely introverted, which often surprises people. I need incredible amounts of alone time. And, my granddaughter will come in and I'll be sitting on the couch looking out the window. She'll say, "What are you doing?" "Looking out the window." I'm just being at this moment. So I think you're right, and a lot of people are really uncomfortable with that inner life, with that silence. If you go for a walk in the evening when it's dark and you walk by houses, just about every house has a flickering television.
That's right.
On, where people are just zoned in and zoomed out, or maybe zoomed in and zoned out.
Sure.
But yeah, and people spend hours, and that's such, from my perspective, that's such a loss. And it's also, it stifles further development of consciousness, I think. I'm not against TV, and TV's fine. But when that becomes your addiction, when every night you come home, you have dinner, and you sit in front of the television until you go to bed, I think it numbs you. And I think it numbs you to a lot of different things, to the realities that we live in. And I think it creates distortions, again, that are not healthy and do not foster healthy development. And when we're talking about consciousness, at least for me, we're talking about development, a movement forward. And it's interesting you talk about that stillness. Most of the prophets all had to go into the desert in order to have their visions, or even vision quests within indigenous communities.
Sure, yeah.
So part of that is really interesting to me, because we have to immerse ourselves in that journey, of which is often dark.
Well, that darkness within ourselves, is sort of a place that we generally don't want to go.
Right.
And I think we've thought of darkness as bad.
Yes.
Or as negative. And I think the meaning has sort of been reversed.
Yeah.
In my new book that I just wrote, called Awakened, The Reality of What Is, the very first chapter is called The Beautiful Darkness.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about the darkness as pure spirit. H.P. Blavatsky, calls, the unmanifest darkness.
Yeah.
And what's manifest, light.
Yeah.
And I think that what we bring into this world, we bring it out of, it germinates in the darkness, and it moves into the light in us, and then we become co-creators, or with the creations that we move.
I think that's very insightful and very interesting. And I mean, you can think about a seed metaphorically. The seed has to be planted in the darkness in order to grow into the light.
That's right.
And So I think we dance between the light and the darkness.
Mm-hmm.
And the difficulty is most people just want to dance in the light.
That's
They
right.
don't want to dance in the darkness. And culturally, we don't want to dance in the darkness. We've lost that on that. But I like that. I like your what you're really saying about the lightness and the
Mm-hmm.
darkness. And I've often thought about that.
Well, it's sort of where the light gathers.
Yeah.
It gathers in the darkness
Yeah.
in us. And I came to this through many hours of creating art.
Yeah.
Just sitting, and I'd be working away, and I wouldn't know what was going to happen next. And I never do.
Yeah.
People assume that I know exactly what's going to happen when I design their pieces, and I really don't.
Well, it's interesting as an organic process, and even for me, and even in my academic writing, but in my writing, I'm often surprised where I ended up, because I didn't know where I was going. Each word falls onto the paper, and another word falls on, but I don't know what word's going to fall after one word that I put on the paper. So I think there is, it's getting in that moment and being comfortable in that moment. One of the challenges I have in my work is teaching and helping students understand that process of writing, that it's organic and not mechanical, and we treat everything mechanical. You had one question about sort of linear, sort of causality and straight. Life's not linear, the world's not linear, and how we move into those spaces where we foster our own development, I think, are often surprising.
It's reaching into that spirit realm or the infinite field of consciousness.
Yeah.
And one of the questions I did have for you was how do we understand that, reaching into that infinite field of consciousness?
Yeah, for me, it actually comes back to, I suppose you could call it faith. So you have to have faith in taking a step into the unknown. And so in my own development, my own experiences of those sort of transcendent places, it's not like I planned them. It's not like I engaged in some process that would lead to them. They just appear. Usually when I still myself, and in particular my mind, but it also opens up a whole bunch of different avenues to reality, what constitutes reality that we don't normally experience during our day-to-day reality. And those have been gifts.
Well, our reality sort of has a ceiling that we generally don't bypass until we reach into that non-linear aspect of ourselves. So once we reach into that, we realize the ceiling in a linear mindset is actually the floor of the non-linear. And there's an infinite amount of places to go, so to speak, places, but
Yeah, and an infinite number of paths to get there. There's not one path for all of us. We each have to find our paths. I had the opportunity to meet with Leroy Littlebear, who's an Indigenous leader out in Alberta. And he said something, and it's been said by other people too. I think, a lot of people that have a spiritual bent, I guess, if you would talk about it, but he said there's many paths to the top of the mountain, but once you're at the mountain, we all see the same thing. That consciousness continues to evolve, and if the collective consciousness doesn't continue to evolve, then our days are numbered.
Consciousness is creative and ever-evolving. Our moment-to-moment task is to follow the path of listening to our body, our mind, and to our spirit, for they are tools we use on our journey. However, a greater truth is, we are not our body, mind, and spirit. Rather, we have a body, mind, and spirit, because we are in this human form. So the greatest truth is, we are divine.
one of the questions I did have is, as an artist, I've expanded my consciousness through looking at art, science, and spirituality. And I feel that by employing what I've learned through those three things, when I employ it into my art, it's helped raise my consciousness. Now, throughout our conversation, I've heard you say many things that have helped raise your consciousness and tools that you use. Could you sort of summarize that for me?
I think the main tool for me has been meditation, and retreat. I would go often on retreats when I was doing my doctorate work, especially through sort of what was called psychosynthesis, which was formulated by an Italian psychotherapist by the name of Saggioli. We were doing a guided imagery exercise one day, and I remember, and then we were debriefing on it. People were talking about, what our sense of community was the nature of the exercise, and people were talking about bridges and very sort of concrete things. But what I saw in my mind were these little pins of light, and each little pin would shoot out and connect with another pin. When it connected with another pin, it burned brighter until all these pins, little pin lights, were connected and were in a brilliant glowing globe. And that had an impact on me. In what way? I think we have access to a wisdom within us. We learn to listen to the body. It's much easier to access. You can't access it. You can't access that inner wisdom through the rational mind. And it's not that it's irrational, it's that it's irrational. It transcends rationality.
And it tends to only know what we've put into it, whereas the depths of the silence in us reveals so much more than our mind could ever contain.
And I think with artists, you tap into something, but when you communicate through your art, it's not up here, it's here, and it's here, and it's through your body, and it's through your heart, and it's through your emotions, and it connects to your soul and your spirit, and that. So I honestly believe that artists will lead us. If we make it to the next stage of cultural evolution, it will be artists that lead us into that with their capacity for vision. And that. So you're on the vanguard. I'm way back and behind the rear troops.
I don't know about that, Al, but I do feel like such an urgency in me, and just to do everything I can.
Yeah.
And that's my outward expression, but to get to keep an inward focus.
As humans, we have freedom. We have the freedom to be that who we are, and all will unfold as it should. We have the freedom to be that which we are not, and chaos will ensue. And I really believe that I'm a little bit drawn to sort of Jungian psychology and the whole process of individuation, but believe that we come to this, that there's a destiny that we have when we arrive here. We don't have to realize that destiny, we have a choice. But when we don't realize that destiny, things get really messy. When we get, I refer to sort of getting off the path or being preoccupied or stuck. And
I think we sort of misplace our steps along the way when we're spending all of our time, outward, engaged in the outward life, or engaged in just the thinking life.
There are many factors that help us expand our consciousness. Some of them are when we take time to reach into the quietness of our spirit. Another is practice setting down our busy minds just to be. Another is loving ourselves, in loving the world, in loving others. That helps greatly. This is a critical time in our evolution and we all have a part to play. There are no small parts in the cosmic dance of evolution. And as we awaken into deeper layers of consciousness, we realize that we're not here for the divine to evolve us. Rather, we are here to evolve God. May peace be with you.